Hi. Let me tell you, theater in the round does not feel like a maverick. It feels like a bull, right? I'm happy to be here. So I'm going to start in a slightly different place maybe, right? And that's my wife, Sean, and I had dinner with another couple, friends of ours, not too long ago. We know them through the high school that my son went to. Their son and our son were classmates. They were teammates on a robotics team. And maybe because their son and our son both have that kind of orientation towards technology and engineering, somehow that always tends to creep into conversation when we go out to dinner with them. This particular dinner was no exception, right? So somehow we ended up talking about self-driving cars, right? And I was lucky enough, I guess it was about 2 years ago, to be in Mountain View and to get to ride in a Google car. And if you ever have that experience, you're a fanatic from that point forward, right? My wife's never been in a self-driving car, but she is absolutely ready to trade her vehicle for one. She would give it up and go with them today. And I think it was kind of in that vein that the conversation was headed. I'm pretty sure my wife was saying something about how great it'll be when self-driving cars take over the streets. When the husband of the other couple looks at my wife and says, "Sean, that's not going to happen. Self-driving cars are not going to happen, not in our lifetime, and probably not in our son's lifetime." Now, I'll be honest, I'm thankful at those kinds of moments, but that my wife has a very, very quick wit. Because I'm usually like just flabbergasted, right? I'm sitting there going, what did he just say, right? But she was very kind of quick on her feet, handled it gracefully. I think she said, you're probably right, but won't it be funny when Todd and I come to pick the two of you up for dinner in a couple of years in a Google car, right? Now, the story goes on, and it has a kind of funny final twist to it, right? We're leaving dinner, and the valet pulls their car up before ours. And it's a beautiful, new, gleaming Mercedes, right? And it's a model of Mercedes that's being touted because it has what Mercedes has dubbed intelligent drive. You see where this is going. I can see some of you already laughing, right? Now, I don't know how much you keep up with autonomous automobiles, right? But SAE, not the fraternity, but the Society of Automotive Engineers, and the National Transportation Highway Safety Administration have a scale for automobile autonomy, 1 to 5. 1 is a car that you drive. You have to navigate it, you control it, you're completely in charge of that car. 5, the exact opposite, completely autonomous. You have no control. It probably doesn't have a steering wheel. It may have an emergency stop switch. Right? The car the other couple was getting into is rated as a high 3 on that scale. I'm reminded of Alanis Morissette. Isn't it ironic? Isn't it ironic? So I would be the first to admit everybody has blind spots. I'm sure I know I have my blind spots. We all have our blind spots, right? And in certain situations, it may not be self-driving car, but in certain situations, we're always going to have that moment when we're the self-driving car denier, even as we're driving alongside cars that are self-driving, or even as we're getting into our semi-autonomous car and driving away, right? So there was a professor at the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan, C.K. Prahalad. And Prahalad had a great term, right? He talked about the fact that we're prone to outdated, dominant logic. And I love that term, outdated dominant logic. The concept really is dominant logic. Outdated dominant logic is kind of what he said we were at risk of. To me, the beauty of that term is that I think it's a way for us to actually think about and explore what I would say is a dark, subtle, slightly dangerous side of what we would otherwise only be able to talk about as common knowledge. Common knowledge. There's a dark side, a dangerous side to common knowledge. Now, common knowledge certainly isn't a new problem, right? But I have a sense that common knowledge is becoming a bigger problem and has become a bigger problem, particularly over the last 100 years. I'll mention something in a few minutes that kind of underscores or holds up that theory, right? But it was about 100 years ago that John Maynard Keynes, the famous economist, said that the difficulty isn't with the new ideas, it's with escaping the old ideas. The difficulty isn't with the new ideas, it's with escaping the old ideas. So my work is interesting, right? I'm lucky to lead a company that lets me work with a really diverse range of companies. I've worked with the largest, best-known companies in the world. Bo was nice enough to mention some of them. I've also gotten to work with what I would say are small, change-the-world kind of ventures. We get to work with regional leadership groups. What's maybe surprising and slightly dangerous to say because it does pay the bills, is that most of the people that I get to work with, that our company gets to work with, particularly people who are in leadership in those organizations, are a lot like our friends that we had dinner with. A lot like the friends we had dinner with. Too many people, I think, are like the friends we had dinner with. Even as they talk about how fast the world is changing, they have this incredible confidence in how things are. They have a kind of certainty that how they think and how they work is right. They have a certain kind of clarity that things are going to be pretty much normal, right? Things are going to stay normal. So the short time I have on this stage and with you guys tonight, I'd really like to make one very simple appeal. Stop acting normal. Caleb, I'm not worried about you. You passed normal a long time ago, friend. Stop acting normal. This is one thing I can absolutely assure you of, and that is the world we live in is anything but normal, right? The world we live in is, to many of the points you made just a moment ago, being reinvented around us every single day. Being reinvented around us in amazing ways. And here's the beauty of it. We can choose to participate in that. And we can choose to participate in it actively or passively. We can choose to participate actively or passively. Now, to me, passive involvement in the way that the world is changing makes me think of the Disney concept of an Imagineer, right? I think that's the greatest title in the world to have, an Imagineer, right? But I think really, for us to be active participants in how the world is changing today, we really need to think of ourselves as reimagineers. Reimagineers. Reimagining what's possible in the world today. In the work that I do, when we find people in organizations that have that quality, generally what we found is what is known as an intrapreneur. Some people are familiar with the term, some people aren't. It's the equivalent of an entrepreneur, but entrepreneurs tend to start new companies. Intrapreneurs are a rarer breed. They're true mavericks because what they do, they change existing companies. They have the wherewithal, the character, the strength, the foresight to change existing companies. Now, if you want to go at it more passively, right? I said you could go at it actively or passively. To me, what passively looks like is just being an adopter, right? We all know what being an adopter means. They're early adopters. We know that big bell-shaped thing that they always talk about. They're the early adopters and the late adopters and all those just kind of in the middle somewhere adopters, right? And to me, I don't think it's really important whether you're an early adopter or a late adopter or an in-the-middle adopter. The most important thing is simply don't be left behind. Don't get left behind. Here's why I say don't get left behind. We're lucky beyond any of our ability to imagine, to live in the era that we live in. More is becoming possible for us every single day. And yet, when we get left behind, there are a couple of things that start to happen. One is we lose some of those opportunities. But more importantly, what we lose is maybe one of the most dangerous things you can lose. Foresight. You lose foresight. Now, that may be a kind of odd thing for me to say that it's an important, dangerous thing to lose. But the loss of foresight has never really bode well for anyone. In fact, in history, it's loss of foresight that has foretold every civilization that we know that ended. Foresight is our ability to bring the future into current considerations and decisions. All right? We get three kind of bats, three swings of the bat at foresight. We can anticipate what's coming. We can recognize the future as it starts to arrive. And we can address it once we recognize it. A failure to do that has fairly serious consequences for anyone. So foresight is an important thing for us to keep in mind. Foresight has an importance for a reason that I think we really struggle to deal with. So I think most of us don't really understand exponential change. And foresight's important to us in this day and age because we live in a time where I think exponential change has finally become real for us. Now, when you think about exponential change, if you're like me, I can't get my head around it most of the time. It's a hard concept, right? I think humans kind of like come pre-installed with something that must be like Internet Explorer 4. We desperately need an upgrade almost immediately at birth, I think. But this kind of Internet Explorer 4 that we come pre-packaged with gives us the ability to kind of understand life as that straight line, right? We think that things are going to be incremental. We think things will get better, but they're going to be pretty much things that we're familiar with. They're going to get better at a pace that we're comfortable with. And I'm sorry to help you understand this, but that's not really the world. The world is that exponential curve. And I think one of the things that we're coming to grips with is that we're living into the hockey stick part of that curve. We're going from being on a hike to being on a climb. we may be going from being on a climb to being on an open face climb, straight up. But I think what's important about understanding that exponential curve is that there have been people that have been trying to get our heads around it, right? We've had people for 50 years trying to help us get our heads around it. The first of those people that I can think of, in fact, it was 50 years ago this year, was Gordon Moore, the co-founder of Intel, the famous Moore's Law, that the capacity of a computing chip would double, and that stayed fairly true. But there have been other people. How many of you know about Buckminster Fuller, kooky little Bucky Fuller, the geodesic dome? So in 1982, Bucky Fuller wrote a book called Changing Times, and in that book, he introduced the concept of the knowledge doubling curve. Some of you may be familiar with this, but the knowledge doubling curve basically says that up until about 1900, human knowledge doubled every century. And then starting in 1900, it isn't that straight line anymore. It's some kind of curve upward, to the point that by 1950, human knowledge was estimated to be doubling every 25 years. You may be familiar with the fact that today it's estimated that human knowledge is doubling every 12 to 13 months. And if you're like me, you're terrified by calculations by IBM and lots of other companies that say that human knowledge will be doubling every day in 6 to 8 years. That's a fairly radical change. Fairly radical change. And I can kind of get my head around that, but honestly, it's still kind of abstract to me, right? So there's also this guy, do you guys know Ray Kurzweil? He may be kookier than Bucky Fuller, right? Ray Kurzweil is, I'm not sure this is a title of distinction, but he's the best known living futurist, right? That's not what's on his business card. What's on his business card is that he's the de facto head of innovation for Google. He's written several books, and I think Ray has the most concrete ways of describing exponential change that I know of. One of those is a thing that he talks about just as the difference between 30 linear steps and 30 exponential steps. 30 linear steps are exactly like a staircase that you would be familiar with. Step 1, 2, 3, 4, straight on up to 30. 30 exponential steps is different. 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, and by the time you're at the 30th step, you're at 1 billion. The other way that Ray Kurzweil has put exponential change that I think I can get my head around is that in the 21st century, the 100 years of the 21st century will be the current day equivalent of 20,000 years. So, welcome to new normal. Welcome to new normal. If you haven't already figured out, I think new normal is radically different from normal. It's not what we think of when we think of the term new normal. It's not a post-financial crisis period. It's not when things that we once thought were abnormal start to feel commonplace. New normal is the reality that we're living into exponential change. And it's something that we have to deal with. I think new normal and that curve up maybe, do you guys know who Kevin Kelly is? Kevin Kelly was the original editor of Wired magazine. And he's come out with a book in the last few months. And I think the title of that book is How We Have to Think About New Normal. The title of the book is Inevitable. Because what we're dealing with is inevitable. We just need to deal with it. So I want to close tonight by posing two questions to you guys. Because I think part of what new normal means is that more is expected of us and more is possible, whether we're active or passive. But the first question would be, what are the expectations? What expectation are you aware of, but not focused on meeting? And why not? The second question would be, what greater possibility have you imagined but put off acting on? And why? We live in an amazing time. A truly amazing time. Stop acting normal. Thank you.